All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we're talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves because they were 46-36 last season. They lost in the first round of the playoffs, 8th in offense, 13th in defense, and I have a couple stats right here because we all know they got Rudy Gobert. They gave up a king's ransom for Rudy Gobert, but at the end of the day, I think Patrick Beverley was a huge loss, but they made up for it in other ways. We'll get into that in just a second. So the Minnesota Timberwolves last year ranked 27th in defensive rebound rate. Rudy Gobert is going to change that. All right. They also ranked 26th in opponent shooting at the rim. Well, Rudy Gobert is also going to change that. So, not that 13th in defense is bad in any way, shape, or form, but I don't think anyone's arguing that Minnesota is going to be a top 10 defense in the league. You're going to be able to use both Cat and Rudy at the same time. You're going to be able to stagger them. So, if all goes to plan, Minnesota should have at least one of Rudy and Karl Anthony Towns out there, one or the other, out there all times. And that's pretty good. So some other moves that they made were you went out there, you got sharpshooters like Bryn Forbes, Austin Rivers, two-way contract in Eric Pascal. Kyle Anderson was a huge get as well. Memphis is definitely going to be feeling it. And Kyle Anderson off of the bench, most likely off of the bench, we'll see, because I have high hopes for Jaden McDaniels. I don't know how Wolves fans feel about Jaden McDaniels starting at the 3 this season, but I would imagine they all love it, because if he can just figure out his role on offense, he's one great two-way player to have at the wing. So, Taurean Prince, Kyle Anderson, Jordan McLaughlin. Jordan McLaughlin started last season desperately. He was shooting like 30% from the field, 15% from downtown, and he actually even lost his spot in the rotation. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because D'Angelo Russell started to get injured a little bit, and he had to come in. Balmoro wasn't really NBA ready, and they just had to throw Jordan right back out there, even though he pretty much lost a spot in the rotation because of D'Lo's injuries, and he made up for it immediately. He is a unselfish playmaker. He can shoot over 40% from downtown, makes an impact on both ends of the floor. And you saw it at the end of the season, halfway through the season. We even saw it a little bit in the playoffs. So don't discount guys like Jordan McLaughlin coming off of the bench, because it's a really, really underrated asset. Now, the overall success of this team this season, in my opinion, is going to come down to D'Angelo Russell, because he played horribly in the playoffs. I don't think that will ever happen again. The max contract, it hasn't really panned out. It's not like deloading's 18-3-7 is bad by any means, but especially with his playoff performance, it's hard to constitute the max contract that he received a couple of years ago. Rudy Gobert. All right, here's the closing lineup. Here's the starting and closing lineup, in my opinion. D'Angelo Russell, superstar stud Anthony Edwards, who's only 21. Jaden McDaniels, maybe they decide to go with Kyle Anderson if Jaden McDaniels isn't ready to take that jump, or if he just doesn't look starter ready, or they like Kyle Anderson a little bit more because he can switch on the guards, he can switch on the big men, but Jaden McDaniels is also versatile on defense in his own regard. And then you have Karl Anthony Towns or Rudy Gobert. Now, like I was saying, I think the team's overall success this season is going to come down to D'Angelo Russell. I think it's going to come down to the pairing of Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, because this is something that will either work really well or they're going to go through some growing pains. Personally, I think they're going to go through a little bit of both. I think you'll have your growing pains, specifically in the first half or so of the season. Once the second half of the season, they should have figured out rotations, who's fitting good with who isn't fitting good with who, how should we stagger these guys, how do we, just everything. So I think second half of the season will run a lot smoother for Minnesota. However, this is already a really good offensive team. This is already a really solid defensive team that just got one of, if not the best defensive center in the entire NBA. So 50 wins I don't think is far-fetched in any way, shape, or form. They, like I said, you got rid of Jared Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley, Patrick Beverley. Those are kind of the big three that you lost specifically in that Rudy Gobert trade. But, you improved. Rudy Gobert, Kyle Anderson, those are two huge gets. Kyle Anderson is a very, very underrated kid. Like I said, Memphis is really going to miss him. You also picked up Austin Rivers. Bryn Forbes, they had a really solid draft. We'll see if more can help them out towards the end of the season. I think it's ridiculous Eric Pascal doesn't have a spot on a rotation that isn't a two-way in the NBA. I feel like Utah shouldn't have let him go because they're kind of rebuilding right now. But 50 wins is not out of the equation. I mean, this is a team that's only going to get better. Now, if you really want to nitpick, there are some, not issues, but there are some concerns with long-term options at point guard. Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, max contract guys. Anthony Edwards will, and that's kind of like the counter to it is, yeah, you paid Karl Anthony Towns and you have Rudy Gobert, and these are max contract type of players, and so is Anthony Edwards, but you also have 2 years left of Anthony Edwards being on a rookie contract. So that's not something I'm worried about. That's not something I would imagine Minnesota's worried about, because that's why they went out there and picked up Rudy Gobert, traded all that for Rudy Gobert. It wasn't even that crazy of a trade if you really break it down, because they have their franchise guy, right? Anthony Edwards is their franchise guy, and they have Karl Anthony Towns. So you have two franchise type of players. What do you do after that? What do you do when you're a rebuilding team, or not even rebuilding, if you're retooling? What do you do when you have your franchise guys? Well, you got to surround them with talent. You got to surround them with meaningful, good talent. So this is a very star-dumb team. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I won't go as far to say as they'll win 60 games this season. I think if we're talking 60-win season, I think we're talking next season. However, I would not be surprised if Minnesota pulled it off. Chris Finch is an unbelievable basketball coach. He's probably top 5 in the NBA. He's extremely underrated. I feel like people really got a taste of that last season towards the end of it because of what they were able to do, getting out of the play-in tournament. Just the culture in Minnesota felt so alive, and I love it for their fans. I absolutely love it for their fans. Minneapolis is one hell of a city. It's one hell of a city. I've only been there like 3 or 4 times, but downtown Minneapolis, outside of Minneapolis, the state of Minnesota, I've been to I think Winona. Minnesota's a great state, so I'm really rooting for their overall success, and I think Anthony Edwards, 21, 5-4, if he ever were to get what he'll get, if he were to get his jump shot even more dialed in at a really consistent basis, because sometimes at times it gets a little inconsistent. It looks like more so when he gets tired out there. I would say Anthony Edwards, he's a sleeper for an MVP. He's a sleeper for, I don't even think all NBA is that much of a sleeper, but we all kind of know, Wolves fans definitely know this, that Anthony Edwards is an MVP type of talent. Whether it's this year, whether it's next year, whether it's the year after that, at some point, Anthony Edwards will be in that MVP race. So let me know what you guys are thinking about Minnesota so far for this upcoming season. If I had to put a prediction on it, I'd say they'll probably go around somewhere between 53 and 57 wins. So I'll go ahead and say the Minnesota Timberwolves will win 55 games this upcoming season.